everyone, and welcome to our special book launch with Gillian Polack. I am Francesca Barbini, the owner of Luna Press Publishing, and today we are launching a book that is part of Accademia Lunare, the non-fiction branch of Luna Press. Now, first of all, welcome, Gillian. It's excellent to have you with us.
It's lovely to be here.
Good. And we are across the oceans, thanks to technology. Gillian is obviously talking to us from Australia. So the book that we are going to launch today is Gillian's latest nonfiction research, which is called Story Matrices, Cultural Encoding and Cultural Baggage in Science Fiction and Fantasy. So now, before we go into the full-on action, I would like to ask Gillian to introduce herself for our viewers.
This is coming to you from Ngunnawal country. The Ngunnawal people are the traditional owners, the traditional custodians of the land that I live on. And normally you do a welcome to country, but it's the other side of the world. There aren't so many precedents for explaining. So this is the country I live on. It's unceded land. It was colonialized. It's called in modern terms Canberra. It's Australia's national capital. I'm an ethno-historian. I'm a fiction writer, and I analyze narratives. So Story Matrices is all about the analysis of narratives. It's my academic side.
Actually, Gillian, yeah, your fiction is also is doing really very well. In fact, you have won the Dittmar Award last year. You are shortlisted again this year. In fact, you've been shortlisted 6 times. What was? Tell us more, please. Tell us more about the fiction.
One of the things I was shortlisted for was the William Atheling Criticism Prize, and that was for my previous academic book. Okay. So I'm kind of a bit nervous about being in two worlds, but I think the favourite thing is Year of the Fruitcake. That was what won the Dittmar.
Oh,
imagine a science fiction world. So our world in the near future, or our world now, where aliens are coming to judge us and to think about us and to anthropologize us and all sorts of that. But instead of coming looking up like Keanu Reeves, the alien in question is in the body of a perimenopausal woman in a misogynistic city.
Okay, nice.
So it's a bit different. A bit different.
Well, but you know, you are a bit of a pioneer as well, because you're also, if I'm not mistaken, the first female author writing about a female Jewish character in a fiction work. Is that correct?
The first Jewish Australian speculative fiction novel, yeah. So using Australian Jewish culture, not American Jewish culture or European. I don't know why we kind of leave ourselves out of things in Australia, but I decided I just get really annoyed at things and take it out on fiction. So that's this. This is the large text edition of it. So it is just modern feminism, because a lot of Jewish women in their 30s and 40s are feminists. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to make them the center of everything rather than the echoes of other people's culture, and discover their lost heritage and have their own foodways and all the things that we take for granted, but we don't often see in fiction.
You're right.
And that was why I wrote it. It was why is most of our science fiction and fantasy concerning this number of types of culture, and why there has to be space for others. And everybody said it won't get published, but it did get published. And yes, it was also a Dittmar finalist.
There is need, who's to say, and you did really well. I love what you said, that when you see something that not upsets you, but you know, it's sort of, you want to change things, then you take it out of fiction, with fiction, through fiction. I love that. I love that. That's very good. Okay, right. So then let's talk a little bit about the book we are here to launch today, which is Story Matrices. So this is a really interesting research work, which I would like also to mention that Gillian and I were both at Dublin Worldcon. This was before the pandemic, and we were physically in the same place, in the same country, right? But it took us to go back to the respective each side of the world before someone managed to make a connection between the two of us via email, where I was informed actually that there was a really interesting piece of research that I would like. And as soon as I read about it, I thought, yes, please tell me more. And this is how we started to work on together on this project. So this is something that sometimes it makes you wonder, a bit of serendipity, a bit of things sometimes come together in their own times. It doesn't necessarily mean that because we were physically in the same place, it still wasn't right. We had to go back home to start this collaboration. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the story behind this? I know it's been a wee while now, obviously, since you started the research. What was the stimulus? What was the impetus behind this particular research project?
I'm actually remembering Dublin. It was the Vector people. I said, I've got this book and I don't know. It's going to be controversial. I don't know if there's anyone who will publish it. And they said, we know somebody. Leave it with us.
Okay.
So I owe the Vector people drinks.
Fabulous. We love Vector. There we go.
Great. So it was the same thing that happens to my novels. I'm an ethnohistorian. I'm a narrative analyst. And the reason I do all this is because I've been in a minority position all my life. I'm a bit ill, but I'm also very Jewish in a country without this enormous Jewish population. Australia has a different bigotry. It's closer to Hobson's gentleman's agreement than to anything else I've read in fiction, where as long as you're the right kind of Jewish, you're okay. But the minute you step outside these little boundaries, you're not okay. So I've been sacked for being Jewish, but no one would admit to it in public. I've been given difficult times in this way or the other, but I still pass as white. I call myself off-white because I like making bad jokes when all other jokes are sensible. So what that means is I look at the world as if I'm Jewish. That means that repairing the world is part of what I was taught as a child. And so it's not just a matter of looking, it's a matter of saying, but what if, very science fictional, what if you think this way rather than this way, can we work together rather than arguing? If we can work out techniques for actually holding discourse across cultural divides, then we can see the things we have in common rather than things we clash with, and talk about the things that matter and understand when we need to make decisions and what sort of decision. I was a political activist for some years, and I got out of that because I discovered I do not cope well with people trying to terrorize me. That's just one of those things one discovers. And I also discovered that I didn't think that politics is where the change is happening for any of us. I think that the biggest cultural change happens through art and literature, because everybody can read something as themselves and make their own decisions about it. So I wanted to, with this book, I want to start informing decisions so people can have tools for saying, I have this in common, I don't have that in common. I really hate this book, let me find out why. So instead of hating the author, sometimes you need to hate the author, sometimes they're despicable people. I am an author, I know this thing, but a lot of the time it's that they come from a different culture to you or to me, and they say things that we can't accept because it's not part of our culture. And so to work out this as opposed to whether the person is not a nice person, I think is really important. So I can respect a whole bunch of authors whose work I detest. I detest a couple of authors whose work was my favorites when I was a child. And to know that I'm making ethical decisions about this, it meant a lot to me. So I wanted to work out techniques that other people can make those same decisions, I guess. That doesn't mean they have to use my techniques. It doesn't, if they can argue with it, they can throw the book at the wall. They can ignore it entirely. But if I didn't make the effort to make my understanding clear and to work out what I was thinking, then I would have been part of the problem, not part of the solution. And I think people disliking each other because of color of skin or religion or size of waistline, that's a problem. People disliking people because they talk too much, that's a different matter. So the people who don't like me because I can't stop talking, that's something about me, myself, they don't like. People who don't like me because I'm ill or Jewish, that's about them. So I needed to work that out.
It's very good. And you did that really, really well, actually. I think it's very important that we unpack. And in fact, one of the very interesting terms that you've used in the book is talking about cultural brickwork, you know, and most people would be familiar, of course, with Legos, of course. And so the concept of brickwork and the way that things are stuck together and assembled together to create, obviously, a picture. And I love that if we start to take a brick at a time and analyze it and look at the strand, etc., it will guide you back to perhaps a point of origin, maybe something that it's easier to understand than if you look at the whole picture, like you were saying. You know, we look at something that is different, and sometimes we just criticize it just because it's different from what we are used to. So it makes perfect sense, absolutely, and that's why it's so useful, I think.
And my favorite term is the diaculture. So that, like dialect, you know what you share with people. Instead of saying, I love sword and sorcery books and all swords and sorcery books must be perfect, you're saying, I love the adventure in this book, but I don't like the hatred of this group, or the fact that a woman never gets to do that, and you work out what parts of your culture, rather than saying global, I dislike the whole thing, or I like the whole thing. I like finding out what we have in common with other people through the tree analysis.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been a really I suppose the process of writing this, Gillian, because you know, you were finalizing your research and you know, finalizing your manuscript as you had the bushfires, and then it was the beginning of COVID. My goodness, it was a really serious situation, because even access to libraries as well for research, it was a very interesting things, actually, that you shared in the preface about, you know, looking for certain books in circumstances such as this. You know, it felt like an adventure almost. It was really interesting.
I almost didn't finish the book. If you hadn't have talked to me when you did and taken on the responsibility of me being shaken up in such a big way, I possibly would not have finished it, even though I know it's important and very important to me. But I was very sick with the bushfires. I was confined indoors from June 2019. The only time I got 3 weeks outside was Dublin and Belfast. So that was my big adventure when I was there. I could actually breathe the air without getting sick. And then I was evacuated in January. In late February, I had a day at the local agricultural fair. And then COVID hit, and I was confined to my flat so that was from March 2020 until last week.
Wow.
Because I'm one of these immuno people. I can't do a lot of stuff. And I didn't really, it doesn't affect, it changes the fiction I write. I'm still writing fiction, but the fiction becomes more, I relies less on going to places and doing research and more on exploring different types of stories. But I don't know, I was on the verge, I'd written most of the draft of it. And I thought, I need to check this up. I need to do all the academic stuff you do to make sure that it fits within an academic world. And what you and I did in the end, because your edits helped me resolve a lot of problems, was say, it's not going to fit in any neat academic world. It's interdisciplinary, it's strange, it's provocative, and that's okay.
One last question before we move on to a short reading. I would like to explore a little bit further the link between this book, Cultural Matrices, and your fiction as well. Would you tell us more about this relationship?
It's a profound relationship. I use my novels to test my theories. I know this is not quite what I'm supposed to do, and I feel guilty about it every time, but it's all very well having a theory about culture and then saying this can apply to everything, or this, you can use this in this way, when you haven't tested it to see if it works in a given novel. So, for example, Poison and Light, the book that's just been shortlisted for the Ditmar. As an historian, I was watching all the reenactment groups and thinking, why is this uncomfortable? It wasn't uncomfortable because they were enjoying themselves. That was great. I enjoyed watching the enjoyment. But so I delved deeply into what I was thinking. And as I'm an historiographer, that's what I did my first doctorate on. I'm an historiographer. And so I look at how people write history, how people think about the past, how people orient themselves in relation to the past. And in Poison and Light, I thought, and this I wrote over a decade ago, it's got a long story behind it not being published immediately. I looked and thought, what if you had a whole society that recreated the 18th century for different reasons? So this person wanted the French Revolution, this person wanted an autocratic society, this person wanted that, and so they shared that. It's not one drive and one simple group of people. It's a whole society doing what they think is the right thing for different reasons with complex and bizarre results. And that tested what I felt as an historian about how we think about history. And it made it all very clear to me, and I can now articulate it and be rational about it. And it's very cool. And that led to a whole bunch of research onto how fiction writers use history in their fiction. So the two things are always linked. My newest novel is The Green Children Help Out, which is always within reach because it's my newest novel. And it's to do with a lot of the things I was looking at in Story Matrices. In fact, that's the test novel for that, if you like. I wanted to know what happens when you actually go by my die culture thing, what people share with their culture. You have someone coming from another world and looking for ways of sharing, looking for things people have in common. If you don't assume that we have a Christian society, for example, if you have a Jewish majority society that produces superheroes, sends them into a world that's not ours, that has magic, but some of the same problems as ours, that's the plot description. But the reality is, how do people cope? How do they see folklore? How do they live lives? How do they make the big decisions about where they should go, what they should do, based upon those concepts? So lots of explosions, neo-Nazis, a whole lot of stuff that's not nice, but it's explaining the theory or testing the theories that I talk about in Story Matrices.
I like this very much as the testing ground, but you're right. It actually gives more depth to your research. And for those of you out there who read both Gillian's fiction and non-fiction, then now, you got something else to look out for, to look at these links. I think that's fascinating, actually. Very good. Oh, I think now it's time for a short reading from one of the early chapters of Story Matrices. So I'm gonna leave you to it, Gillian.
Okay, I'm going to read. The chapter title is In Order to Tell Stories, We Need Worlds. That's actually highly appropriate given what we were just discussing. So perfect. This study is about narrative. Narrative is what holds humanity together and what tears humanity apart. Shared narrative is an impossibly strong force. That cultural point where we share all aspects of a narrative is both amazing and terrifying. We all know of politicians who try to change countries by establishing shared narratives of a very dangerous kind regarding trust, truth, and knowledge. We tell stories, and those stories have meaning, and we act on that meaning. In order to tell stories, we need worlds. This is where genre fiction is of particular importance, especially science fiction, fantasy, and historical fiction. These genres use effectively built worlds and facilitate cultural sharing. We'll focus on them and just a little on other kinds of fiction. How and where the worlds are carried into fiction and the locations where creators and consumers of all kinds have roles to play. The focus of the study will be mostly on the writer representing the creation side, but when necessary, The study will also examine the reader, representing the consumer side, as well as placing a writer's work in the context of the broader publishing industry. The publishing industry is seldom neutral in relation to how a writer's work reaches the public, so it cannot be left out of the study entirely. Most explanations of writing fiction tend to describe the world writers create for their story as consisting primarily of conscious narrative decisions made by a writer who then creates a story from them. This world that the writer creates for the story, however, isn't merely the result of a set of decisions. The cultural knowledge that precedes these decisions is critical. Thus, these decisions are themselves secondary to something else, as the acts of making conscious decisions about the world in which the story is set and the filling in the gaps between these decisions take a writer into story space. Story space is where the world of the novel is built, a structure that exists mainly in an author's mind, although with science fiction and fantasy, computer and physical supplementation are not unknown. Some writers create databases for their worlds, others create models and maps. This world creates a place from which further decisions are made, and this place for many writers is immersive and even prescriptive. This is story space. Readers read from story space, writers enter it to write. This element of narrative will be explored shortly. It's critical to consider the material a writer brings into the world when they're building. What creates the bricks and other pieces used to build and create? What underpins the choice of brickwork? What is carried into story space knowingly or unwittingly? For some writers, the story space intentionally draws upon their knowledge of the world they live in. For others, it's invented from scratch. I've examined this in history and fiction in relation to how history contributes to a writer's story space. In this study, I'll extend that analysis with an examination of story space itself and the role cultural transmission plays in translating constructs established in story space into story. It's critical that story space uses the writer's research and thought for the world of the novel, but that it draws on the writer's prior knowledge and education to do so. It's also critical that for the reader, it connects what the writer has successfully communicated of that research and the world of the novel with the reader's prior knowledge. It's one of the pivotal places for cultural transmission through narratives. Each writer writes from a unique space, but they create their story space in overlapping ways, combining their assumptions of race, gender, and of the shape of the world itself with the kind of things one finds on a world-building website. A popular world-building website for fantasy writers, for example, is Patricia Reed's page on the Science Fiction Writers of America site, which she titles Fantasy World-Building Questions. Once a writer has developed a story space, they can use it to draw on what they've invented, as well as what they already know.
Oh, thank you very much, Gillian. So the book story Matrices will be released on the 5th of April this year. EasterCon is called the Reclamation and will be held at Heathrow. I believe it used to be the Parkin, but it's now the Radisson. So that's where we will be. And we will have the book launch again live. So if you're there, do please come and see us. The pre-orders are already open, and you can pre-order the book either directly onto the Luna Press website in our store, or of course through your online retailers of choice. It's going to be available both in print but also digital. So with that, I then would like to thank Gillian very much for being with us today and joining us for this lovely event. I hope you all had your aperitifs at hand and join us for this pre-dinner lovely get-together to celebrate the imminent release of story Matrices. So Gillian, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a lovely time.
Good. So we'll see each other again digitally, at least at EasterCon. And to all of you, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we hope to see you at EasterCon as well. So this is goodbye from both of us. Have a lovely night, everyone.